Am I still live? Yes. So ready?
You're on the review.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order, the Planning Commission, August 25th at 4:34. And just everybody from the Planning Commission is in the room. So we've got a full house. Are there any citizens to be heard? And I don't think there's anybody here or online. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Any ex parte communications or disclosures, anybody? Okay, we are ready for the approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion? Second. Okay, Jerry seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Abstain.
You're abstaining, okay.
Yes.
And presentation, I guess, if Trish is ready or has anything to say.
I don't have too much. So I just wanted to go over a couple things that on the county commission the other evening. So the River Sands rezone, we passed unanimously. That was the one that was that odd size.
Yes.
They were like, yes. And I will state that I got an email the next morning from the property owners that were just very, very thankful. And they were excited to move on because their family, I think they're going to build a home for their kids next to them. The King Street rezone in Thompson, that passed unanimously. And then, as you know, we're talking about the land use code amendments tonight, so I won't go into that very much. But yeah, I don't know if Amy, you want to speak to, we're going to speak to it.
I'll get
So
to it later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so do you guys
Yeah.
have any questions?
Yeah, Trish.
Yeah.
So I was there, for the workshop, and then I did citizen be heard, and then you guys then were returning item 15.
Yeah.
What was your kind of like outcome with, I mean, the big question was, do you do the planning? Do you do the thing that gets put on the bookshelf and not, or do you do the meat and potato land use code? Like, what was the result of your argument or the discussion about that?
So we were going to get into a lot of that when we got to that item. And
Okay.
I think, Trish, are you staying here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, and we'll go into this more, staff was directed to continue working on the code revisions. So in particular, the commission instructed us that critical to go forward were, I believe, 4 things. And then the other stuff was sort of left up to if staff felt it was ready to go, if the planning commission was ready to go. But there were really 4 things that they felt were critical to move ahead. So staff, we can talk about those 4 things first, was my plan for our workshop today. And then if we get through those 4 things, then I wanted to talk about some of the other code revisions. So that was kind of my plan for today. So that was our direction, was that we really need to talk about these 4 things and see if we can come to a consensus on those 4 things, and then recommend some kind of approval or changes or those kind of things for the county commission. So, so what we're also directed is that we will have a public hearing at the planning commission. So we're gonna have another public hearing at the planning commission on September 9th. So we have time to do a 10-day notice and notice everybody so they can come and attend if they want to. And then we were directed that it go to the county commission for the first public hearing on September 17th. So that's what we were directed to do.
And I should state that the public hearing for Moab Heating Pool opened at the county commission, and we did have some of the neighbors come and speak to it, but the applicants actually weren't there, so I should state that. So that's where we sit now.
In the public hearing on the 9th would be on the output of this meeting today. Right.
Yes, I mean, it'll be on all of the code revisions as they are in your packet, depending on what we all talk about, but we may revise those and change that in the packet for the next public hearing. So,
okay.
But yes.
I'll just chip in with my understanding. I do think the county commission, as far as I know, think that these are important things to look at, get on the books if everybody agrees with, and probably shouldn't probably wait 5 or 6 months. So it may be chicken before the egg or whatever, but it's something we probably should take a good serious look at. That's my understanding.
And that was for the 4 items specifically.
Okay, and no other questions of Trish? Then we're going to go into this item, in fact, which has everybody from the planning staff presenting.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Are you doing,
Did I miss?
no, I think you're good. Okay. You might just want to state that there are no public hearings, but, which I think you did. Okay. Would you pull up the agenda summary for me? Okay. So what we thought we would do this evening, based on what we just talked about, was, we want to run through the 4 major items that, we were directed to move forward and talk with you about specifically. And then if we have time, we'll talk about other ones that everybody would like to discuss right now. So the 4 items were specifically, and I might get these wrong, so I'm going to look. The big issues were the zoning district's red line, and specifically this new range and resource -20 zoning district, and these renaming of a few other zoning districts. As we worked through some of these items with the county commission, they agreed to let this renaming go. So that's what I'm going to continue forward with, is that there were supposedly no changes to those zones other than a different name. So we're going to strike this renaming of the range and grazing to country residential, and the NC neighborhood commercial to neighborhood mixed use. We're just going to keep those status quo. We don't really see a point in changing the name right now. As far as the range and grazing, what are we calling that now? RAR, resource, range and resource -20. They directed us that they would still like that to move forward. So that's something perhaps we could talk about right now. And they understand that a zoning map amendment will be needed to apply the RAR 20 zone. One of my concerns is we're creating this new zone, but we don't know where it's going. So I would prefer that we were also doing a zoning map amendment at the same time, but that's not what we were directed to do. So we would have to be recommending approval or denial of this zone or changes to this zone, not knowing where it's going, which is somewhat difficult. So I think we should have discussion about this, and maybe think about the current range and grazing zone as we're thinking about this, and we could pull up some maps or some code sections, but and maybe comparing the two might help. I'm not sure, but I know there's a larger minimum lot size in range and grazing, I believe, or no. This is a larger minimum lot size than range and grazing. Forgive me. So we can talk about, we could look at what is the uses allowed in there are, and we can look at proposed, and we can look at, is that the appropriate size for the minimum lot size? So we can launch into that discussion. So do you want to start with the uses allowed in there, or do you want to just have general discussion about this RAR 20?
How does staff feel about that? How do you guys feel about those big changes? You're gonna have to deal with it.
My preference would be to adopt a map at the same time. I have a hard time approving a zone not knowing where it might be placed in the county. And if you look at the description, there's a description of it. So I suggest we look at that. it does say the purpose. So it's supposed to be located in the outlying areas of the county where uses such as agriculture, grazing, wildlife preserves, land conservation, wildlands recreation, and natural resource extraction uses may be allowed per the table, which we can look at. It also says the purpose is to preserve resource lands, accommodate agriculture and agriculture-related uses. Here's something I might have an issue with, while allowing very low density, not sure why they use the word ranch style residential development on land that will primarily remain in its natural state. It also says these lands are located in those parts of the county with limited public services and no commercial services. Goes on to say limited residential development at a density of 1 unit per 10 acres is permitted. So even though we're saying RAR 20 is the minimum size for a new lot, you could basically do 2 units on a 20-acre lot. Not sure, you could look at those standards. Heightened development standards are required to reduce wildfire risks and impact to wildlife ecosystem scenic values. I'm not sure if we have those in the code or not. I know we have some wildfire hazard standards as far as when you're out in the country, 100-foot fuel break, things like that. I don't know if they're in our code.
Pretty sparse, but they're there.
Okay, and then, okay, so as you look at the use table, I think it's important to look at that, and staff did kind of ran through, okay, what's allowed in this new zone? That was something we sort of focused on when we went through it. And we had some questions and changes to this use table. So it says, single-family dwellings are permitted. It says a 2-family duplex dwelling is permitted. We'd like to strike that P. After reading the description of the zone, we don't feel that's appropriate. We also thought group home, other group living, they both have Ps. We all thought that should be stricken. There was also all community service, daycare general, daycare limited. We thought the community service, daycare general should be stricken, but that limited should remain. It put college or university as a conditional use. We thought that should be stricken. So we can kind of run through this, and we based these on the description of the zone. So that's what we were thinking of when we were going through this use table. So I think that's a good exercise for the Planning Commission to do. We can also talk about that minimum lot size and the density. So.
I mean, I had a couple of things I was going to bring up, but one of them was reading the purpose and reading the uses. It didn't seem to put much emphasis on kind of protecting the resource.
Right.
So that I agree that that's something to be take a good look at. There's a little slippery thing here that one of my friends brought up, but I'd already seen it, and it is what you wouldn't want to do is say, well, you've got 8 acres, so you're in the RAR 20, but you can't build a house because you don't have 10 acres. So that's something that should be fixed, because I imagine everybody would agree should be able to build a house on your property and not be able to do it the way range and grazing things should be done. And the other thing, which may be a very far reach, I would say 1 house per 10 acres is maybe more than I think should be done on these properties if their purpose is for grazing, kind of protection of forest land, and agriculture. And then I would also simply add, I agree, I would love to see it on a map, but I can kind of imagine the map. If you were in Spanish Valley and you had 20 acres, it probably shouldn't be R&R, probably, but maybe you'd want it to be for agriculture, but at least it wouldn't have this kind of thing of limited services. So it might not qualify. certainly a lot of area up in the LaSalle Mountains don't have the surface and probably would qualify for this. But of course, the devil's in the details. That's the reason it'd be nice to have a map.
Mhm.
But I think protecting the resource is probably important enough for me that I'd be comfortable going ahead with not yet knowing exactly where these things were. Just my personal thing.
Sure, yeah. And I know sometimes, and I like your point about a pre-existing lot. So let's say we have a pre-existing lot that's 8 acres, like you said, and it might be rural residential right now, just as an example. And then this RAR 20 is placed over that property. I do think we should have something that says a lot pre-existing at the time this ordinance was adopted is allowed one dwelling regardless of whether it meets the minimum lot size, things like that. So we can, that's a good point, and we can definitely do that.
My literal reading of it is if you're over 5 acres, you become RAR 20, even though you don't have 20 acres. But you want to make sure that anybody who gets labeled RAR 20 can build a house. No more than one per each 20 acres, something like that might do it.
Yeah,
If the other language stays the same.
As I read the combined, I think this is, I see your point with the 8 acres and building a unit. And I think the commission's attempt to divorce the name change from range and grazing to county residential is a little confusing, because with this RAR 20, if we implement that, wouldn't an 8 acre lot actually be a range and grazing or a county residential lot upon that, like, to pull that lever, right? It wouldn't be an RAR 20 because it's a less than 20 acre lot, right?
well, again,
Is that not how it works?
so sometimes when new zoning designations are created and a map is drawn as far as where do we want to see this zone? Sometimes you're not looking at specific lots. Sometimes you're saying, this is the area where we feel this should be. And then you start looking at specific lots. So there may be lots that are less than 20 acres that get this zoning designation. That could certainly be a direction to the county commission that we want to make sure any lots that we designate this should already be over 20 acres. So that, I mean, that's certainly something to think about when you're looking at where is this going to go. And that way we don't run into that situation, but sometimes an individual owner can own multiple parcels that could be sold separately or could, and so you may have an 8, a 20, a 15, and that amasses their property, right? So that's just one thing to think about. That can happen. So, and they may want the ability to do different things with each of those parcels. So it's just something to think about. So it can happen where you put a zoning on an existing lot that doesn't meet the standard.
Thank you.
There is a definition in the land use code for a lot of record
Okay,
that might be able to mitigate some of the problems you're just talking about,
sure.
but you'll have to tweak it a bit because it's an ordinance. It was an adopted ordinance clear back in 1978, and it's in the definitions. So that might be a good way to tweak it, because that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Anytime you lay that zone district over, even the mountain properties are out there where people only have 5 to 10 acres.
Right,
That will be a lot of record, and it just needs to be something that you're cognizant of
right.
as part of the process.
Okay. We'll take a look at that.
I have kind of a procedural question about the path forward in September 9th. That is, if we're going to be looking for public feedback on the 9th in the hearing, and you're a person who might be affected by this, but might not, how do you even know? I mean, what's the point of the hearing? How can you do that without telling people they're affected?
I don't have an answer to that question. I honestly don't. Same way we're trying to consider it right now, like, okay, we know it's gonna be in areas of limited service. We know it's gonna be in areas where we want to have this agriculture and this grazing but I can't answer that question.
But then from we have in order to make a zoning change, which this would be, we'd have to go through a hearing process. So what that means is we're gonna do a hearing for RAR 20, but we're not gonna apply it to anything. So then when we apply it to something, that would be another hearing.
Yes, so it does say in this land use code revisions that you have, it does say that a subsequent zoning map amendment would be necessary to actually implement this anywhere. And like I said, typically I would do this at the same time.
It seems to make more sense, doesn't it?
I'm gonna follow up Jerry's process point with a thing about Atma. You're gonna have to notice that hearing on the 9th tomorrow. It's a 2-week public.
It's a 10-day notice.
10-day notice.
Yeah, so we've got it on our
That's-
calendars. I think it's the 30th. Yes,
30th.
yes,
That's
correct, correct,
and without a map as an exhibit.
correct.
Is it 10 working days or just 10 days?
10 days.
And sorry to go back a little bit, and I didn't watch all of the YouTube recording of the county commission meeting, but as condensed as possible, could you offer us the reason why the commission kind of overruled the staff suggestion of tabling this, getting this portion of the general plan finalized and adopted, and then
Sure.
updating the land use code?
So I'll give you my take, but I'll also let Trish speak maybe on the same issue. So we let them know the planning commission tabled it at staff's recommendation. We expressed that we still felt that was the correct path. We were told that these 4 items that we're discussing are crucial to move forward. When pressed for a reason why, some of the other county commissioners asked those questions as well. Like, okay, what is our hurry? What is going on? So the answer we were given was basically that these have been in the works for a long time and they're tired of waiting and they just want to see it get done. There wasn't really a justification for these 4 specifically, other than they felt that these were the most crucial to adopt as soon as possible. Trish, did you want to add anything to that? Okay, okay. Trish might have more insight on that than I do. Okay,
I have one other question on that.
yeah.
Anything you're going to put in as a conditional use, the use specific standard has to be written for it too, correct? So is that happening hand in hand, or how are you going to work that?
That's the goal.
I noticed they didn't have a lot of them.
So we have not very much time to do that. And we certainly appreciate the planning commission's thoughts on that as well. So so some of those Ps we're wanting to remove, some of the Cs we would like to see removed. And so we could all talk about that, and what we're left with, I think that's when we should look at the specific use and what does it say about that C or things like that.
So could this particular zone be adopted with a lot of those things removed or not used? Then once the zoning map gets put there, you can add them in and also put in the use specific standard, or is that too complicated? Is it something that doesn't sound like in the realm of possibility?
I mean, as you can see, things get amended often. So I would say, we could take our best stab at it at this point, and then yes, when a map is created, we may want to alter some of those or add things to that, or so yes, that would have to be another amendment to the land use code.
Along with the map. Just
Correct. Yes, we could do those at the same time.
Okay.
I want to be solution oriented here and work with this. This seems like it's set up to fail.
As far as, sorry, which
Just
thing?
The process of, it seems like I don't know if this is putting the cart before the horse, or just working out of order because it's been a to-do list item for a while. that to me doesn't seem like a good enough reason to, like, I don't, what is the impact going to be on our fellow residents? I see this blowing up, quite honestly, because we've lost patience. I don't know. I'm absolutely willing to look at this and certainly will and do the best we can, but I feel like that needs to be voiced. That's the vibe I'm getting from you all and as I look at this as well. And I can understand the commissioner's perspective too, of having, you know, seen this for a while. And I would imagine there's probably some anxiousness because some folks are not going for reelection. So there's going to be a changing of the guard coming up. I would imagine that would play into this. I don't know. Just voicing that. No action.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, thank you for voicing that.
Yeah, what I saw on Steve was that there's this 180-day period and they're so concerned that there's 12 hours of overlap that some developer's gonna sneak it past the goalie on that day to do another 180 days where like anything we change now, or sorry, there's like 180-day thing where like, if you put in an application in 180 days, if there's any changes, you'll be retroactively subject to those changes. Right. So like, that's, I just saw, I was like, well, I mean, I don't know. I saw, I was like afraid of things that I'm like, I don't know. Like, you know, that this is actually, if there's any fear, this is actually going to expand kind of better development, but yeah. I hear you on that, Steve.
And Aaron, thanks for bringing that up because I forgot to talk about that. So yes, that 180 days expires on September 3rd. And so the county commission also directed staff to draft an ordinance for resolution for another 180 days. So they want to, on September 3rd, adopt another resolution that, is a little more specific as far as the articles that are being amended. So the current resolution says Articles 2, 3, and 4. That's all it says as far as what might be amended. So we suggested that if they do another 180 days, that we be very specific about what code sections are going to be amended. And so we're charged with creating a list, which is on my plate, of instead of just Article 3, we want to say Article 3 sections, you know, so that people are on notice more what is changing in Article 3 rather than it being sort of a shot in the dark. So so that's our direction as far as for this next 180 days. So
And I'd say the way I guess I'm going to look at this exercise, especially now talking about the RAR thing, is I'm actually in favor of having such a zone. I won't know where it gets put now, but there will be another opportunity when we start looking at the map and having workshops. Where should you put such a zone? I probably brought up such a zone thinking that it would be more resource oriented than this one. I think I maybe mentioned it once, that, you know, it's my growing up in Oregon where they're trying to protect their agricultural lands, and they're saying, hey, you know, you can have one house. It varies all over the state, but you know, one house for 80 acres
yeah.
might well be what they do. I am for having such a zone, and I will not know where it's placed, which is what I think we're ending up doing. And it would be nice to know where they were going to be placed at the same time you did it, but
I completely agree with you, Obi. I think that holding a public hearing on zoning changes without a map of those changes is a capricious decision. And I just won't ever recommend that that's a good idea. With exception to the major utility overlay, which has been mapped, you have described that as essentially the WISA boundary. We know what that means. We know why we're doing it, but this other stuff about name changes, the use table in and of itself is too big. That should have its own public hearing. They just threw this in there with 4 other, I think, really quite arbitrary things. And I just don't see any cogent process forward here that's in good faith to the public's interest. So I'm a little baffled.
Sure, and I think the planning commission could certainly, you know, you're a recommending body. So then the code does say that the county commission shouldn't take action until there's a recommendation from the planning commission, right? So your recommendation could be denial. And but it's a recommendation, right? So that's what they didn't get because we tabled it. They put it on their agenda and wanted it to go forward. So my recommendation to you is if there's some things you feel you can support or alter so you can support it, that's something you should do. If you feel like the consensus is we can't support this without a map, you can certainly say that in your recommendation when we do the public hearing on the 9th. So, and you may hear from the public, of course, at that about what is this RAR 20, where is it going? You know, so at that public hearing, that could be part of your recommended motion, right? So I think you still can recommend whatever you feel is best. And then, you know, and then it's out of your hands, but, you know, but I encourage you and advise you to do that. Whatever the planning commission feels is what they should recommend. And whatever they hear from the public should be included in your recommendation. So.
Well, Tony just said 2 words, arbitrary and capricious in his, when he was bringing up the stuff.
Mhm.
Those are lawsuit words from the public.
I like to use tactical speech.
Well, they're usually what you hear when you go to land use conferences. Those are the 2 words gonna cause you to get lawsuits. So, and he brought about that in recommendation of the codes.
Yeah.
I'd be careful.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we can move on from RAR 20.
Amy, I had one more question about it. It looks like RAR 20 and range and grazing are kind of hand in hand, and the RAR 20 would be some subset of what range and grazing is today, right?
Yeah, because I know that, you know, the hope was to also rename that range and grazing.
Right.
But you're correct. I'm looking for it right now. If you look at the description of range and grazing as it stands, I can't find it right now. They are somewhat similar. And so I don't know if you could pull it up. I can't find the current one. No, the range and grazing that was proposed to change to country residential.
Right. Which is now going to remain range and grazing.
Correct.
We're
They
not
just,
gonna do
the
that.
direction, yeah. So if you look at to accommodate agricultural and agriculture related and low density residential development, it's very similar.
Right.
So I think the idea was that maybe country residential would become something else, but that wasn't
Well, it doesn't,
it wasn't proposed as far as what would it become. So, so yes, they're very similar, other than I think the minimum lot size for range and grazing is different than our AR 20. What is the minimum lot size for?
I believe it's 5.
Might be, we could look it up. Yeah.
Range and grazing is fine.
Yeah, okay. So right now, all it would do, the only difference between the two might be 1, the minimum size of the lot, and 2, the use table.
right. You know, honestly, on a big lot, most of the uses I think they're kind of in keeping with larger lots anyway. Like you're not going to do a 0 lot line house in the middle of nowhere, right? So why have it on there?
No,
So these things kind of make sense, other than we're changing from a 5 acre minimum to a 20, which I guess if you're a landowner in a remote area, maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. But I guess that's the reason I brought up the procedural piece of this is, without knowing if this affects me, if I'm a landowner, I don't know whether I should come in here and give my feedback during the hearing process or not.
yeah.
It just doesn't seem right to me.
It doesn't seem right to me either. Yeah.
So we're doing what's directed by the county commission and bringing this back to you. I tend to say, I agree with your comments. So, here we are. So I would encourage you guys, as you think about the meeting on September 9th, hearing whatever public comments there are, and then, providing your recommendation going forward. So I do think you might want to look at that minimum lot size, however, and as part of this discussion, maybe you do want it to be more like 40 or something larger, and really look at that use table. So, I think what we might do, so staff had recommendations on this table as far as we don't think there should be some Ps where there are, we don't think there should be some Cs where there are. And so if it's easier, what we could do is, the table's getting pretty messy. As we have, you should see mine. If all of our chicken scratch marks on it about this or that, it might be helpful if staff present a CUP table with what staff recommends, and then you can sort of compare the two. Would that be helpful?
Yes.
Okay, because it's kind of hard to keep marking up the same table. So how about if we, and I'm sorry we don't have that for you today. We could run through it if you want, but we certainly no 0 lot 9, no alley loaded houses in this, some of these zones. And so anyway, I think that would be helpful for you all in the packet for this 9th meeting. You can see what staff is recommending for that table. And we're happy to run through that right now if you want to, but there's a lot. So
now I need to know how this procedure kind of works now. We're having a discussion here, and are we going to be changing what moves forward to the workshop? And if we are, do we need to take a few votes as we go along? That is, do we say, well, we're just going to move along now with RAR because we've discussed it? Because I have to say, Tony may have misinterpreted what I said, which is, or maybe not. I like this zone.
you like the idea of this type of zone?
I like the idea of this
Yeah.
zone. I don't know where to put it exactly,
Yes.
and where we put it would have a lot to do with with what the use table would look like.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what to do about that. If I had a recommendation, I'd say, well, I like the zone. It's a great idea to have this zone put somewhere. But it's really difficult to change the use table. So I don't have many recommendations on that,
Sure.
except to say that if it were really in areas where we might traditionally think of as resources in the wildlands, should be grazing,
Right.
should be wildlife, shouldn't be residential. But those aren't all the places they might put this zone.
Sure.
Then I'd look at certain uses and say, I don't know what's on there, but I wouldn't want a machine shop there.
Sure. And so,
Or a university probably.
so, as we think about moving forward, it might be good feedback for the county commission to say, we support the idea of this kind of zone. However, we'd like to know where this is going, and we'd like to, and then we could really look at the use table. So you could provide that feedback to the county commission as far as, we'd like to see this type of zone. We're not ready because we don't know where this is going, or those kinds of things.
And therefore, what happens at the other question though is, so what gets presented at the workshop, what we are
You mean at
looking
the
at
public hearing?
tonight? Or does it, or do we make changes and then it get presented to them?
So we're in a workshop, so you can provide direction to staff as far, you won't be voting on anything this evening, but I'm getting a consensus of the planning commission's thoughts about this. So, so it's really at the public hearing where we'll take comments from the public. And then, yes, you will have to amass all of that information and make a recommendation. So if you want to direct staff to change anything about it the way it is now, we can do that. And that would be what would go in the public hearing packet. So as I said, staff has some changes to this CUP table, which we are going to put in your packet and provide as this is staff's recommendation for this use table. And then you may want to look at that and come prepared to change some of that or strike all of that or whatever it is you guys decide to do. But I know it's putting you in an awkward, strange position. You know, as public comments come, it's hard to answer some of these questions. So we'll just do the best we can at the public hearing. So, but I do think getting as clear direction from you all as possible will be helpful for us. And, you know, what I'm hearing so far in a nutshell is that the idea of a zone with larger lot sizes that protects open space, agriculture, forestry is the commission is supportive of. What the commission isn't supportive of at this point is approving some type of zone like this without a map. And knowing where it goes will affect maybe the use table. So that's the consensus I'm hearing right now. And so that's kind of what we need to know right now. But if you want to direct us specifically, change the minimum size to 80 or whatever that might be, you know, let us know. But that's the consensus that I'm hearing so far.
I like like Obi said, I like range and resource, as an idea. I think I've made my protest to the process being taken here well clear. I remember from the last time we received, public comments about this, it's, that, I think he was here, a friend of yours compiled all of these other.
That was Harry Holland, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and all these other counties standards. I noticed in that packet that the range and resource analog in a lot of other counties is a 40-acre minimum lot size, not a 20.
Mhm.
I would think that a 40-acre minimum lot size maybe takes us a little bit farther away from that 8 acres and I want to build a house scenario that you were concerned about.
Mhm.
So I would consider, I would recommend that you guys consider running it with a 40-acre minimum lot size for range and grazing. Also, you know, when I'm thinking about, not range and grazing, range and resource, when I'm thinking about range land and how many AUMs you can squeeze onto 20 acres, I mean, hobby farms, maybe some, but like 40 acres is really like where you get into, if you want to talk about range, like
Yeah.
commercial 40 is better. I'm looking at Trish because she's got the doctor and stuff. But right, like bigger's better for the range stuff.
Sure.
And at least regarding this item number 1 that we have been directed to consider, that would be the one, like, all right, let's move forward. I would say RAR 40, not RAR 20.
Okay, thank you.
I would agree.
I guess I want to make a quick comment, like, I want you to know that I wouldn't say the commission was in consensus, right? That it was thrown out. I wouldn't say that everybody was like all shaking their head together. So the reality is any comments that you have, if you're like, we're not doing it, that's fine. Does that make sense? Like, I think the reality is this is your purview and we want your feedback as to that. So don't feel uncomfortable. Don't feel that we're here telling you what to do. I think the commission was slightly fractured in this. And so we want that feedback. Okay.
Thank you, Trish.
Yeah.
Tony,
Okay.
I guess the difference between a 40 and the 20, it doesn't mean a whole lot to me unless I can see where the heck this is gonna go.
That's a good point. I'm also thinking about how much usable space is a 20-acre lot. If you've got a large single family home that occupies 5 acres of sod, you're actually rocking like 15 acres. Maybe that's like, what are you gonna squeeze 10 cows on that? Like,
Yeah. And so there's a phrase for that some people use called a martini farm, where you really want to look out over your farm and drink your martini. You know, I mean, So, yeah, there is the fear that that is what will happen, you know, where you get your big estate lot, and you
Yep.
can have your vineyard for fun, and you can, you know, and not that that's bad. It's not that that's a bad thing. And maybe that becomes the country residential zone.
That's what I'm
Right,
thinking.
so I think that's where some of this specificity, which was the word that we were all having trouble with at the county commission meeting is, you know, and so. And again, that's having a thorough review of everything, but I think, and there's a place for that. It's not a bad thing to want that. And so, you know, that's a 5, 10, 15, 20 acre lot, like you said, where I want to have a horse and I want to have my chickens and my, you know, and I want to have my vineyard that I get to, you know, put around in, and that's all great. But yeah, I don't think that that is I think your idea about you approve of a zone that does protect the resources. I think that's a good thing to say, but I agree that it probably needs to be a larger minimum size lot. And maybe this country residential becomes the other thing that Tony was just describing.
Yeah, which, I mean, it is that interesting, because the terrible thing I think of is, why is there only one? You know, an RER 20 and an RER 40, maybe there's different zones in different places, because the LaSalle Mountains someplace may be set for a bigger one, but Spanish Valley may be set for a smaller one. I mean, it's so interesting. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm just
Sure.
tossing it out.
I think that's where other zones might handle that.
Yeah.
As far as in Spanish Valley or somewhere. This really, I think the planning commission is in support of a zone that really preserves agriculture, grazing, open, you know, and it even brings up mineral extraction. So as we were thinking about that as staff, we thought, okay, well, if you're really extracting all kinds of things, you would then have to have a way to process those. You would then have to have a place to store those. You would then have to transport that. So, you know, it kicks in a lot of those things. And so, and again, not that mineral extraction is bad. It's just, you do need a minimum lot size to accommodate an operation like that. And so, yeah, it brings all those things into play.
I wanted to ask about the components of RAR 20 or 40 or whatever it would be that would get into mineral extraction. Again, harkening back to Mr. Holland's recommendations and what other counties do, they have entirely separate zones for forestry
Mhm.
and materials development, which is like sand and gravel
Yep.
and cotton. Those are very useful. You don't want to have a 40-acre forested lot that somebody decides they're going to put a gravel pit on.
Yes.
Vice versa, you don't want to have somebody that develops a gravel pit, and we do need gravel. I'm not dogging on gravel pits, but then force them to try and regrow a forest on
Sure.
top of where the bowling alley is, right? That's
Right.
how that works.
Yeah.
So
No, exactly.
like there's it's like in general, if this is I think we can take time to do it right and get myopic as we should, as myopic as our landscape is varied. Or we can just do it the quick way. But I don't like that latter version.
Sure. And what some other states and other jurisdictions do is, as we're talking about the general land use plan and the land use element in the general land use plan. So some places, when they adopt a general land use plan map, or as we call it, a future land use map, you'll have a designation that says resource, just as an example for a word. And then under that designation would be the zones that were allowed, right? So you might have agriculture resource. You might have, or whatever word you want to use for it, but you'll have a zone that allows forestry, a zone that allows agriculture, a zone that allows mineral extraction. A lot of people use the word aggregate for that, you know, so that's again, something that this commission can look at when that future land use map comes to you, because it's going to, you know, as it relates to this whole concept of having a forestry zone, an agriculture zone, that kind of thing.
we'd also point out that having those kinds of detail in our zoning is beneficial for residents who are assessing the value of their property. And, you know, the USDA has specific defined terms like
Mhm.
irrigated cropland versus pasture land versus non-irrigated cropland. Painting with a broad brush, particularly when you're talking about this kind of zoning, doesn't necessarily help a lot of people. You know, people get excluded from assistance from the NRCS if they're not on the right kind of law.
True.
Right? We don't want to pigeonhole our
Yeah.
people that way.
No, that's absolutely true, especially if you're zoning them agriculture.
Correct.
You know, some places it's extremely difficult to do agriculture if you don't have irrigation, or if you have poor soils, you know, all those things come into play.
Acre hobby farm and he doesn't get to upgrade his pit.
Right, yeah, yeah, no, point well taken, yeah. Okay. I don't think we'll bother with the use table on RAR 20 right now. But you will see something in your packet for the 9th. That'll be staff's recommended use table. Which will probably look different than the one that you have now. Okay. This will be the one that probably takes us all the longest. I don't know. Maybe we'll do the other two first, but so we had CUPs is something that we all need to look at and workshop on. The other thing, which is also might take us a while, maybe not, was this idea of lowering the density in highway commercial. That is something that we were told needs to move forward back to the county commission. And then there was a fourth thing, which I keep forgetting. Maybe Trish can help us too. It was the zones, the CUPs, the highway commercial, and
Major utility overlay.
the major utility overlay. So we may want to talk about the HC, then the CUP, then the overlay. Does that, how about we do that?
Okay.
Before we wear ourselves out, okay? So let's do, and maybe we'll do CUP last. So, so the HC, so the highway commercial zone, currently has a minimum or maximum density. What do we? 18. Minimum or maximum? Okay. It has a maximum density of 18 units per acre. So what is proposed in your LUC revisions in your current packet is to lower that to 5 dwelling units per acre. And maybe Trish can provide a little feedback. I don't really have any explanation as for why this is being proposed, other than I think as we're looking at all these different residential zones and multifamily zones, I think that there's some concern that the highway commercial might not be the most appropriate zone to have a lot of residential uses, because trying to support commercial activity, those kinds of things. And so again, that's something to look at. Where is the highway commercial zone right now? And so so that's something for us to talk about. One thing that I talked about with our consultant, CBZ, that's working on our land use element. You know, as we talked about this, we sort of talked about sometimes what you'll see is you'll have like a highway commercial zone, general business, whatever zone it might be. And you'll want to have what's sometimes called a buffer zone, where you would have the highway commercial uses. And then a lot of people do multifamily residential as a buffer before then you get to residential, right? So as we think about this proposal to go from 18 to 5, the other thing to think about, one, what is the purpose? Maybe we can come up with what that might be. 2, is it still appropriate to have dwelling units in highway commercial? And if so, what type of dwelling units? And those kinds of things. So Trish might be able to give us a little bit of history on the 18 to 5. I'm not sure. But I think that's something for the commission, this commission, to talk about, is just as we look at the definition of highway commercial and we think about what that is or should be, then is residential an appropriate thing in that zone? And then what types of residential and at what density, right? So I think that's kind of what's on the table.
I can give you a couple comments from the other evening, but Mikhail, maybe you remember kind of the history of the discussion, but the only comments I have from the other evening is there was a lot of pushback on this one from a number of the commissioners. And if my memory serves me, one of the commissioners was saying that this would be a way for us to incentivize. I can't remember how he put it. Do you remember that? Like, well,
Oh,
if we, if you remember.
Yeah, I think one of the commissioners just said, well, maybe we can incentivize by increasing the density if they do affordable housing.
Right.
And so
That,
again, I'd like to caution
Yep.
us moving forward that way, as far as then you really have to look at those standards for,
I mean, there was.
I mean, people in a highway commercial zone can't provide 50% open space in order to get affordable housing. So again, that it's a ripple effect, right?
Yeah.
So if we mess with this, it also means, so I hesitate to get into that in this discussion, but you're right, that was brought up as
That was the only.
as this was sort of the base density, but maybe you could get more.
Right.
Yeah,
If
so.
we, yeah, right. That's
Yeah.
all I remember. And there was quite a bit of pushback specifically under the concept of takings, right? Not to say that it doesn't happen, but
And I will say, we asked legal counsel about that, and they don't feel that this would fall under that. In a nutshell.
I don't know, did you have anything kind of like from past meetings where anyways, I don't remember really having. Yeah, if you do, that's great.
So just remember that highway commercial isn't along the highway only. There are other places in the county that are zoned highway commercial that this would apply to.
Okay, so I think,
I was only smiling because I was thinking, well, Cane Creek's one of them.
Yeah. so I'll let you free form talk about that.
Yeah.
I have a thought, might not be a good thought, but if we want to keep the highway commercial actually, when it was first put into place, was C3, commercial 3. But there wasn't anything out in the valley. There wasn't even water and sewer at the time. It happened in 1978. And the highway commercial at that time was essentially kind of an industrial zone because that's all that was out there. So maybe, since we like to change names and everything, change the highway commercial name to high density. And then leave a section of it, highway commercial, out farther south, because that's essentially the industrial area. Because I think trying to take that 18 units per acre away from people who have it right now is arbitrary and capricious. Two words you guys hate, and could happen. I mean, honestly, or you're going to have to let every single person that has that kind of zoning know it's going to change so they can get out of it before it happens, because they might be looking at doing something. And if I'm going to not have it, I'm going to sell it so somebody else have that problem. And then once again, it's a lawsuit. So
Yeah, and we did,
you know, even if you just leave sections of it high density, even especially if it's in a residential area. And I can't think of anything right off the top of my head that's there except for on Spanish Valley Drive, because at one point, Spanish Valley Drive just up from Mill Creek, that was the old highway, and that's why it was highway commercial, because
yeah.
that was the old highway. So
yeah, and I
those
can,
are things that you might just think about, especially if
Sure.
you're doing the zoning map change.
sure. And so we also talked with CBZ about this because they're working on this future land use map. So we did mention to them that we felt that some of the highway commercial really is functioning more industrial right now. And so we did talk about, you know, perhaps looking at that, about areas that maybe should be zoned light industrial versus highway commercial. So that is something that we talked about, because you're right, some of them still are functioning like light industrial and may always function that way. And so But yeah, no, it's good to think about. And when you say high density, Mary, I just wanted to clarify, you said some of this should remain high density. Do you mean at the current 18 dwelling units per acre? Okay.
I mean, there are areas there and they were set up specifically, especially when you get closer to the city where density is needed, especially if we're gonna throw in affordable housing. There's gotta be an area that goes, maybe you can change up to a high density 1810 and go all the way out in a different direction, but anyway, I'm, as a citizen of Grant County, I would be real careful with trying to take that away from some people, especially since I've been through it.
I tend to agree very much with Mary that keeping 18 units per acre, particularly because a lot of the highway commercial zones that I'm aware of and drive past and interact with the most are outdoor guides and outfitter licensees who are really high tier, high priority candidates for high density employee housing. On that thread, this says that residential development is discouraged adjacent to highway commercial, while overhead, what do they call it? Upper story residential is encouraged. That seems like a little bit of static to me. You're gonna discourage residential development adjacent to it, but encourage residential development on top of it. That it just doesn't seem cogent. I'm gonna use that word again. Just so for that reason, I would say either no upper story residential and encouraging a higher density adjacent to highway commercial, or I think the 18 units per acre is a good number to be at. Especially with the kind of commercial that we have. Those uses that are not industrial, right? I don't think Harrison's are gonna build a high density apartment housing, employee housing complex, but a lot of the uses along 191 that I'm aware of might be a candidate for a project like that.
Sure, yeah. And yeah, in staff's reworked use table, we did remove upper story from highway commercial.
Gotcha.
Um,
I'm just.
But yeah, we do feel like in the neighborhood mixed use or neighborhood commercial is what it's called now. In the neighborhood commercial zone, upper story residential makes sense, in a mixed use zone or in a neighborhood commercial zone, that makes sense. But we also felt that maybe that upper story didn't quite seem appropriate for highway commercial. So,
Especially juxtaposed against discouraging residential development adjacent. That's.
where's that language?
It says here in the article, lot design standards.
Oh, okay,
the
that's
bottom.
implied here.
Yeah, in Article 5 lot design standards, it's the second
Oh.
sentence, residential development discouraged adjacent to highway commercial uses.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's implemented in the code, but if it is, it just does, that makes sense.
I mean, I think the purpose there is to limit nightly rentals being built, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to do.
That's
Um,
my understanding of the.
Right, but like, it's funny, like affordable housing can go both ways, right? Like super dense housing, downtown New York City is some of the most expensive stuff, right? But some of the like more affordable housing is like second story on top of a commercial building at the same time. Like I remember Mike saying like, oh, the only way he was able to afford someplace in St. George was on top of a commercial setting, and just by the inherentness of it, it was cheaper. And so that's where I'm like, well, is this a good way to get like somehow like affordable housing that's not affordable? Like, okay, it doesn't have 50% space, but somehow just being how it is like lower cost. So that's kind of my thing on it. And I like the idea what Mary's saying about like looking at it as high density commercial. Like, how do we make more pleasant downtown areas? And this is kind of like the idea behind it. And I'm very much pro that. Like, we need kind of walkable downtown commercial areas, but the highway part of it indicates more like corporate box stores in my mind, that like, you know, it'd be nice if it was like mixed use neighborhood highway commercials thing. I don't know. That's what kind of my thoughts about it. I'm like, why kick that out other than to limit the night? Like, is there a way to like piece this together?
But
You know what I'm saying?
already, correct me if I'm wrong, but already we can't get, I mean, you can't just build a place on highway commercial and get a nightly rental license.
What happens if that
That's
moratorium gets lifted? No, that's what, like, that's always a question, you know, and so that's like, I'm like, well,
That's a long path, though. To lift a moratorium and then start building 5 units per acre instead of 18. I don't know, that,
I mean, the state would be like targeting that moratorium, right? So like,
I guess the thing that baffles me, I think all of us can agree that we need more affordable housing here. And I just don't see how reducing the density by 2/3
yeah,
creates affordable housing. It goes the opposite direction. Not only do you get fewer units per acre, but all of your infrastructure costs are now amortized over a third as many units.
Well-
It's just absolutely the wrong way to
Right.
go.
and I think the key is, I'm thinking about how like things are built, is if it kept above the second story, then it tends not to
Sure.
be necessarily a nightly rental thing,
Well,
right? Like, oh, I want to go on vacation, nightly rental. Well, here's this like noisy dump by the highway, or like, you know, this really nice place. I just,
but
you
if
know, I just,
if you, I see exactly where you're going, but here's the other part of that too, Aaron, is if we go from 18 units per acre to 5 units per acre.
that's not what I'm advertising.
No,
Okay,
but
I'm going the
just-
other way.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if we do that, all right, now I can only build 5, I might as well make them real high end and, you know, and now we've done the absolute opposite of
Yeah.
what this community needs.
How many structures in the current highway commercial 18 units per acre are actually set up per Pulse's standards to have residents come in the first place? And has that infrastructure even been realized?
So I know, again, talking with our consultants as we were looking at this the other day, we do have a map and they have it on underdeveloped lots. So they do have, you know, an aerial photo and a map identifying those lots that have areas that can still be developed. So I think that that's something to think about when you think about the outfitter that might want to build an apartment building for their employees, right? So, you know, you do have to have a certain size lot to do that, and parking and all those kinds of things. So I did ask, I sent an email today because I sort of want to know how many acres of highway commercial do we have? So I sent an email just saying, hey, can you guys run a report for me? Because in my own mind, I'd like to know what that is. And so, but keep in mind, some of those are built out and some of those, you know, can still be built out. So I hear Aaron's point about like, why limit any housing type, you know, if we're trying to encourage more housing. And I think that's a good point. But you're right. It probably would require a new building, because putting upper story residential kicks in all kinds of building codes. And so to change an existing business and add a second story can be pretty difficult and cost prohibitive. But if you're building a new building and you're planning for that and you build all of those requirements into the new building, that's a different story, right? So I think when we're thinking about upper story residential, we're probably really talking more brand new structures. Someone can add a second story. It's a lot of work and there's a lot of requirements for that. But someone might want to do that. To Aaron's point, you know, maybe they'd like to do that. So I hear both sides for sure. You know, and speaking on the term affordable housing, I think one thing to remember, to your points, is that more housing helps with keeping costs down and helps with having more opportunities and more choices. You know, if you want to live above a commercial building, great, you know, you have that choice. So I think the more options and choices we can provide, that also helps having inventory. So I think inventory is important. So.
Higher density tends to be, I would say, something along the line of apartment buildings tends to be the kind of thing that people aren't interested in doing nightly runs in, right? Because people are more interested in renting at Rim or something like that, where they've got pools, lots of parking for ATVs and all the other things.
A few comments I have, and this could be a little wandering. Just one thing to just to chime in on, like the neighborhood mixed use, having residential above. From some communities that I've learned from, that seems like a great idea, but ultimately where it fails is parking. So once again, I mean, that's just the system we have in this country that just, you know, it becomes cost prohibitive because you have to pay so much just to house a vehicle, much less a person.
Yeah.
That's what we're in though. You know, we're talking about reducing highway commercial units 18 to 5. Why aren't we talking about an incentive to increase from 18 higher?
Yeah.
Now with that, you know, of course we could then put in some of those controls to, you know, create that as whether it's a, you know, active employed household or affordable with some of those elements of AEH in there. What I would say is kind of a counter to that would then be, well, now we're kind of changing the product mix of highway commercial. And if we have housing for locals for active employed household, now we've just taken away our potential commercial space. So then where are other companies going to come in? You know, where are they going to go? And we're making this requirement for active employed household. Well, where do they work? They can't be remote given our current AEH requirements. And so now all of a sudden we focused on one issue, but now we really have shot ourselves in the foot in terms of economic diversification and strength. So I kind of see that. I don't, maybe there's do we, instead of lowering it all the way to 5, you know, by right, do we lower it to 15 or 10, but then add an additional incentive that says you can go up to 25, just random number, if it meets these requirements? Because I do understand, and I don't think it's the reason for this, not necessarily wanting to fight like nightly rentals, because we do have that moratorium currently, although I think you bring up some valid points, Aaron. I think it's more so that right now it's so valuable to create some high-end, you know, not multifamily, but, you know, condos like I don't know, what's the place south of
Sage
town
Creek.
that has the Sage Creek, the one with like the
Yeah.
Flintstone sort of arch thing.
Yeah.
The
Sage
rock
Creek,
arch. You know, something similar to that, the bedrock. Oh, you know, because I do see, you know, like, and that's very much, I don't think what we're trying to solve for. So I do see that as like the reason for this. I think that is the number one reason from my gauge on things. Last point I'll make is I did hear an argument about this, that we want to reduce from 18 to 5 because that's not a place for, you know, more affordable or middle of the road housing because it's not dignified enough. It's like, well,
Yeah.
it's better than living in your car.
sure.
So like, I just conclusively, I want to smack that argument down. I
Right.
think that is I don't think that is applicable here.
So just to summarize what you said, Steve.
Oh, I don't
But no, the idea of maybe lowering it more to 10 dwelling units per acre, but then providing some ideas for incentives to get you back up to 18 or get you to 25 or whatever that number might be. So,
But
yeah,
you're
I think
saying the
that's,
sticking point is all about this like open space requirement.
well, that doesn't have to occur in this zone necessarily, right? Because
So is this?
you
the
want this
compromise?
zone to be more dense, whether it be denser commercial or whether it be those things. So as we piecemeal this, it's a little harder to think about how can we incentivize? Because I think in this type of zone, asking for 50% open space isn't going to work. We want this zone to be more dense. So you'd have to think about what would the incentives be? So maybe it's I'll probably get shot down for this. Maybe it's an increase in height. Maybe it's so that you can accommodate another story. I know. Sorry. Maybe it's increase in square footage, allowable square footage. Some places have a maximum on allowable square footage. We don't. So those are, there's different ways to incentivize things. And I think that's something that would have to be worked through and I like where you're going with it, Steve, as far as let's incentivize instead of totally take away. But I think that how do we incentivize that has to really be well thought out and figured out. So, yeah.
I might just add into that, we think a lot of times in incentives for housing and, increasing the density, what sort of, this might get a little out of our purview. It's just the land use focused body, but what are the incentives for business? Because right now we have these highway commercial lots that say 18 units per acre. That's extremely valuable. If you pencil it out and say, oh, I'm going to do this many units, whether or not that's actually, a realistic thing, because a lot of these lots, I don't know if they're in a location that people would pay top dollar for, but that's, I think, the mindset of folks. But I mean, we need some businesses here. I mean,
cheap, abundant commercial space.
Yeah, and is there an incentive that if you,
I
don't know,
think
if you
those, Steve,
increase the business or buildings, or you build like that south end in San Juan County, like that,
The office park.
the
Yeah,
idea though
something
was
like
doing
that
the
can be-
neighborhood commercial though. It's kind of like how we are doing that, right? Is that kind of the addressing? I don't know. That's why I thought like,
what was
I think the idea behind you, like I'm 100% behind you, but like that neighborhood commercial, because now we can upzone residential to neighborhood commercial or something, but we can't downzone highway commercial to more of a mixed, smaller scale stuff. Right? Like that would be like more difficult to do.
Well, I'm just trying to understand the
Well,
question, Eric.
Yeah, so like you're saying like bonus density for commercial.
Okay.
Like, right? Like we do bonus density for residential. How do we get like bonus density for commercial?
Sure.
Right? And that's chopping up space more. Is that what you're saying, Steve?
that could be it, or just incentive is more broad. That's my comment of why I said it might be outside of our purview.
okay.
Maybe it's a tax incentive or
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
but I don't see us, really investing in businesses and people's livelihood. And I think if we don't do that, then if we're trying to, build up local housing, well, what are those local, like, what are their jobs going to be? We're kind of saying you have to be in tourism because, these exclude remote workers, and I'm not advocating that that's what we need to create housing for, but like, I just don't know what the options are. We've got like 4 big, companies like that.
I agree with what you're saying. I think you have to work in tourism. I think that ship has sailed in Moab. I think that cat's out of the bag. I mean, and I don't think that gets fixed by this body or the county commission or anything else. Sorry to sound pessimistic there, but like, what Moab's gonna develop something new. We decided, we made up our minds on that one back in the 1990s.
Well, the economy,
Economy's developing.
the economy is kind of a fickle thing, right? I mean, if a huge lithium deposit was found, this economy would change. And I think it would be hard for this group or any group to stop that if the money is, if the financial incentive is there. But honestly, I don't see that happening overnight. The odds of that are probably low, but who knows? Uranium's taking a comeback here. I think that train's left the station. That's going to happen. And that's going to bring in more higher paying jobs, So, I mean, will it be here or will it be in LaSalle? Who knows? But I can guarantee something's going to happen there. But I guess from my perspective, if we're gonna solve this affordable housing issue, the way to do it is to build flexibility so that people can come up with an idea and make it work, but build in enough guardrails that it ends up, you end up getting some high density housing in here that in the end becomes affordable, because the only way you can get economy of scale in construction is with higher density. It's not gonna happen any other way. And that's why I look at this change and I say, why would we take any step backwards? If we're gonna do a density bonus, start at 18 and say that's where you wanna build home, build 18 per acre, you can just do it. If you want a density bonus, you can go up to 30. But these are the rules you gotta follow. But don't go backwards even one step. We're in a mess today and this is what we got.
Well, I'll just chime in and say, I mean, it does. I've actually wondered several times why it was going down to 5. I've been one of those who probably said stupidly at the time, well, but at least you could do a density bonus, but I see no reason not to leave it at 18 and remind folks that, you know, we do have this rule right now, which has the overnight overlay. It means basically that the county council takes a look at these things and says, hey, you know, here we'll allow 12. Here we're going to allow 14. They're very, very, very unlikely to allow 18 per acre in highway commercial zone, or, you know, and over building big hotels. I mean, that just doesn't seem to be something they're doing, especially if they're paying attention. Is this helping the town or the county? Is it helping us with our ratio of overnight rentals and non-primary housing units, which keep continuing to get bad because we've already got so many hotels in the pipeline in theory, because of course they may not build them because we can't fill the ones that we have. So I don't see why we would make this 5. It sounds like that's.
Other than provide some kind of incentive, and I've not heard a way to do it yet. Like, I'm just like, oh,
Like
what
a
is it?
commercial
What is the leverage? It's too complicated for me to be like, oh yeah, just, you know, it's 40 if you do it for, you know, like, what is there any, like, you keep saying incentives, but I don't hear an example.
Yeah, I don't have one for you. I mean, as
Can we make one? Can we?
well,
be-
sure, absolutely,
Yeah,
but
so can we do, maybe that's the thing.
well, and
Make
so
incentive.
as Steve was saying, you know, some of that might be out of our purview as we think about what might a bonus be. And I think again, this is something that's good to talk with the public about what would an incentive be for you? You know, they're the business owner. I'm not the business owner. I don't know what they're dealing with on a daily basis. I don't, you know, so I think that's where some public workshops can be a good thing or whatever, you know, like what is an incentive? And so I hear what you're saying, Aaron. And so I think incentives in a highway commercial zone are so different than an incentive in a residential zone. And so that's where we would need time to figure that out,
But
you know,
kinda
so.
don't have time. That's-
No, well, not right now.
Yeah.
And so, correct. So, but keep in mind, you know, the other thing, you know, yes, there'll be other takes at looking at this, but,
So we can provide an incentive just as easy as we can at 5 per acre, right? So.
Right.
So why drop 5? Just do
Yeah.
18.
Right. So are we kind of in consensus of keeping it 18 then, or, I mean, like, kind of get that.
I'm hearing a consensus that I don't hear any support for 5. I'm hearing some talk about, you know, maybe it were a little lower, but there's this incentive to go higher. But then I'm also hearing, let's just leave it the way it is. And maybe in the future, we can create an idea for an incentive to do 25 or 30 or whatever that might be. So,
We're not here to make a motion, so
yeah.
we painted in broad strokes.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you know, there's a little bit of consensus going on. And so I think that we're just going to leave it as as is for now, and you guys can figure that out on the 9th. And it'll be interesting to get some public comment. We have one so far, came in after the county commission meeting, not in support of lowering the density from 18 to 5. So I think as the word gets out and the public is able to comment more on this, it'll, I think you'll get some more feedback on that, and it might help direct where you want to go.
Can I make just,
Okay, yeah.
just my last closing thought on that is I would encourage all of us to really consider like what the justification would be for that. I think we had some really great ideas, but I think the more succinct that we can be, helps articulate that more clearly to the county commission. Because I do think we've got a situation where there's a lot of fear about, well, what is the worst that can happen with that? And that's a really strong sense. And, I think we as humans tend to go more with the emotion at times. And I can see that side, but
That's a really good
Before I get-
suggestion. I'm gonna take that to heart. I'll have a list.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about this major utility overlay and making major utilities. Oh, removing major utilities as a CUP and requiring an overlay. Right? Okay, so I'm just gonna let freeform conversation happen on this one because I honestly haven't had time to really think about this one yet. I will tell you that in my experience with overlays, the way that I am used to creating and enforcing and dealing with overlays is that it is truly an overlay and that the zoning designation stays in place, but that there's an overlay over that. And that's not how we do that here. So remember, the way we do that is an overlay is an actual zone change. And so I think, I have no recommendations on this one at this point. I need to read it some more and wrap my brain around it and what does that mean. And so so I'll let you all discuss this one. I know I think Bryce has something to add, and I know that the idea of this boundary, I think Tony brought that up, that there is a boundary identified, which I think is helpful. And so at least we know that, so that's good to know. And so I'm gonna let Bryce say something and then I'm gonna let you guys talk.
My only concern with this was we have some pretty far flung areas around here that don't have centralized utility, but they might. How are we dealing with growth, say, with the Thompson Springs Special Service District? Would they have to then become part of their own overlay with a set of precedents for that? I know it's not within the boundary as explicitly stated, but would it be at some point? And how cumbersome are we making processes just to build a house? So that is a little bit of a worry that I have with this one.
What is the definition of a major utility?
There is one.
There
And we
is,
can pull it up.
so I think
It's in
Definitions.
it is in here. But I think it's is it under the definition section?
No, I just.
It
looked at the
basically
definitions.
says, see, it says
taking all of that out.
cell towers, cell antenna, electrical substations, natural gas pumping station. What? I think I'm reading the right thing.
I was thinking this is the major utility, which is the wastewater treatment.
But
plants.
this says uses not included. So I'm
Three.
so I'm looking at this proposed table right now and I'm a little confused. I thought major utilities, oh, you're under public use. You were in the wrong table. Okay, major utilities are waste treatment plants, water treatment facility, water towers, tanks. Water treatment, waste treatment, water towers, tanks.
So all of the water tanks in the valley then would become major utility and would have to have its own. I mean, it's all over the city, all over the county.
So existing water towers wouldn't have to go, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question. Would we rezone all the existing water tanks? I don't know.
It's odd to me that major utilities doesn't include electrical transmission lines, natural gas trunk lines. Those are clearly major utilities. Again, I like the idea of, well, I should say, I understand the commission's intention to limit large scale development in the urban growth boundary and all that. I know why they want to do that. But again, starting to get a little bit like a major utility absolutely includes the Williams pipeline. It absolutely includes the old Centennial telephone transmission line that nobody even realizes exists. There are a lot of major utilities that are not included in the definition. And so like tread cautiously when we start to point fingers.
And I think that that's something the planning commission can recommend as a change.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing
Yeah.
is like, if we're gonna talk major utilities, let's include natural gas, let's include electrical transmission. There are other even water type things like diversions, which are on the table. So I think a better and more comprehensive definition of what a major utility is would be good. I also didn't know what you described about how overlay is an actual zone change. I don't like that as much when I realize that it's an actual zone change in the existing zoning.
Is that with the development agreement though?
So, we're talking about one today, which is, the HDHO overlay or the overnight accommodations overlay. In those situations, yes, it is an actual zone change, and yes, there's typically a development agreement with that. So, but it literally, there is no underlying zoning designation anymore. It receives that zone.
However, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like that property could change hands and the new owner could do whatever they want as use by right in that zone. They have to be challenged.
So that, and you're right, Steve, there's a development agreement and I don't know all the specifics on a lot of these, but if someone were to want to buy a piece of property that used to have that and change something about it, I think it would depend on what the development agreement said as far as does this run with the land? Those kinds of phrases. So if somebody were want to take it, it'd be a zone change to take it back to something else, change it to something else. It would be a zone change, but that development agreement might say this runs with the land in perpetuity or whatever that, I don't know without specifics.
Leading to my next question is like, what is the virtue of basically what this functionally does is replace the need for a CUP with the need for a development agreement. How do those two things differ? Does the county get more authority and more discretion with a development agreement versus a CUP? What is our standing if we choose to pick up a new implement? Right.
Yeah, and I think, the general direction is to try to remove CUPs as much as possible. But again, good points, Tony, as you think about that. So if you don't have CUPs at all, and you just have permitted or not permitted uses. So let's say a major utility is permitted only under these circumstances or only with these standards. So you would have to be very specific as far as must be within this boundary, must provide this, must do these things, right? So there's a way to do that and make it a permitted use under these standards, conditions, circumstances, right?
Right.
And so this overlay is, you're right, it's another tool. It's another tool to,
I can be a little bit more specific with my question. Does a development agreement allow us the same authorities to prescribe operating and maintenance standards and agreements the way a CUP does? Like the development agreements, we're gonna like build it out this way, and we promise the as-built will be what we say. But with CUPs, as far as I understand it, there's annual statements of compliance and those kinds of things. I like CUPs because of that. That ongoing custodial nature of that permission, particularly when we deal with easements. I handle a lot of easements across the eastern half of the state, and we need to inspect things for hazardous materials and fire safety. And those ongoing statements of compliance and inspections that come along with utilities are really, really necessary when, especially if we're talking about expanding things, natural gas pipelines and electrical transmission lines, which pose real hazards more than fresh water lines. So it's just one of those things. I'm cautious. I understand why they want to do this. I like using the GWISA boundary as the general like end zone of what this urban growth boundary should be. We want the water district, the utility suppliers to decide where utilities need to go, not real estate developers forcing the hand of special service districts. But don't like throwing CUPs out because of those continued compliance things that we have. I don't know if we can do that with a development agreement, then I'm on board. But I just don't know as much about development agreements and CUPs.
You know, Tony, even water towers and tanks fit into the potential hazard
Sure,
category.
absolutely.
They're not maintained correctly,
Absolutely.
they become a big problem.
But stop asking, no, but let's hear for you. But do we evaluate CUPs and their compliance on a yearly basis? Ish.
Some of the CUPs that are in place now state in them that they should have a yearly inspection or something. We've never done that. Some of the ordinances that deal with CUPs say things should be reevaluated on a yearly basis, and we haven't ever done that.
I can think of one example. Okay, sorry, but the UMTRA project, it publishes an annual statement. They have their own oversight committee and all of that. And obviously, if we're talking about hazard and risk to community, that is in a class all on its own, right? But there are some instances, and having that authority, I'm not pointing a finger at anybody for not getting those things done, but having that tool in the box is better than selling your screwdriver, right? Like,
To be fair, I don't think we ever had the mechanism to do it or the staffing to do it. This software that we've got now helps us recognize when the need arises, and we can actually do that.
and we're progressing in the right direction.
We are.
I agree.
I don't know if standards of the CUPs are better to try to keep track of than a development agreement. We've had trouble with both, so.
I generally, when I consider the kinds of uses, and we're talking about utilities, and when I assess utilities, special service districts, political subdivisions are low risk because they're empowered by the political structure of the state, right? But other utilities, which we should include in this, private corporations, things like that, the derelict infrastructure is thankfully not a problem we have in Grant County very much because we don't have that much infrastructure here. But just go up into Uinta County and look at derelict infrastructure across the board. And I don't know, I'm not involved in local Uinta County politics as much, but there's a good example of what happens when we don't treat utilities, especially private sector corp utilities, and say like, hey, you guys gotta, start doing this. And if we does this overlay make it as, remember the high density housing overlay mess and how we just got like a bunch of stuff at the wall and we don't know if any of it works with that overlay? Are we gonna do that with pipelines? Right? I don't know. I'm cautious. I like why. I just can't get on that now that I think about it. Spin it on it.
How much does the state require for major utilities? Don't they fall under the state somehow where they can just be allowed in areas? Isn't there some
Well,
state requirement for that?
I'm trying to understand your question, but are you, yes, there's certainly oversight of certain utilities from state or federal agencies as far as where those are allowed. Sometimes, sometimes they're allowed to go wherever they need to go, which can lead to some issues as we talk about pipelines and things like that. As far as, continued, are they in compliance? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Yes, a lot of that is regulated by entities that shouldn't really be the county. You know, are they operating the way they should? Are they following EPA guidelines? You know, all those things we don't get into. So I think when Tony's talking about, you know, making sure they're in compliance, it's more with, you know, what this definition says as far as, specific measures to mitigate impacts the major utility may have on the surrounding area. So maybe it's landscaping, maybe it's noise reduction, you know, those kinds of things where they're supposed to build a 10-foot concrete block wall, but they haven't yet. Those kinds of things. But we don't typically get into unless it's our own sewer treatment plant. And again, that's other agencies that are making sure that's working the way it should. We would be looking more at, have they done the things they're supposed to do to mitigate those impacts to neighbors? That's more what, did they construct it according to what they said they would do? You know, those kinds of things.
Generally, the landowning authority, permitting authority will look specifically at hazardous fuels, refuse, and fire protection. Would be those like three bodies of what we would be looking at when we're talking about major utilities. The things like water quality or the practices of the, you know, transporting at certain pressures of natural gas, that there are other state agencies for that. But what happens on landscape, how they maintain their right of way or easement, are they cutting back their fuels, you know, that kind of stuff is there's an state agency that's going to require that. That's going to be the landowning or permitting.
So. Obi, do you feel like we can move on from this one?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we probably can
Okay, and I
move on.
think
Yeah,
that,
I kind of like the thrust of it.
yeah, I think back to Steve's point, you know, as you think about your recommendation to the county commission being, having a good language and narrative for whatever your recommendation would be will certainly help the commission as far as, you know, what you might be suggesting or changing or those kinds of things. So again, something to think about for when we meet again. So, all right, it's 6:15. I just want to think about maybe the next 15 minutes. I hate to have us go longer than 6:30. We all kind of start to get worn out. So tell me what you'd like to do. So you could wait until staff provides you with a new table with staff recommendations on the CUP. Or you could, maybe we could take a little bit of time and each commissioner can kind of point out some glaring things that they feel shouldn't be there or should change and give us a little direction as well. For how do you guys want to handle this table? I feel like hearing from the commissioners, maybe some things that really stood out for you in that table would be helpful. But I'll let you think about that and answer that.
Do folks have suggestions on particular items in the table?
Do you happen to have another printed one? I just lost my.
Oh, I can show you my completely marked up one.
Same, that's all I have.
Yeah.
I'll make do.
I'm sorry, it is on the screen and we could scroll to wherever you need it to be. We could maybe even zoom in. If that helps.
Yeah, you can just sit right in
I
front of me.
stand in front of those screens all the time. So, yeah, so I don't know if you want to just, we could hit a couple categories and you could, tell me what you feel about something in that category. There's, I know there's a lot in here. So, I'm not sure how you want to handle this part of the discussion.
Do you guys want to, for instance? Perhaps, for instance, in the commercial uses area, it says all other retail uses would not be permitted. Right now, when anybody wants to come and pull a business license in highway commercial and they would be considered other, we have to give them special permission to operate because as the table is right now, other retail uses aren't allowed in highway commercial. So it's things like that that we definitely need to change.
Yeah.
And there might be other things that you would notice as well.
And I think that's things that staff have identified and we definitely want to change. And so, yeah, I think it would be really helpful if you all point out the things that you've really noticed and feel are good or bad.
Some of the sections, like the use specific standards, there, and I'll send you what I found. There are some things that the number is wrong. Or
Oh,
the-
yeah.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
guys probably found it.
But no, anything that you've identified, Mary, please send to us. Yeah, we've identified some of those
And-
as well.
Another big thing, and I've said this from the very beginning when I was sitting over there. There definitely needs to be use specific standards. If you've got a C in that section.
Yep.
There's nothing for them to look at, and arbitrary capricious once again pops up because it's exactly what you'd be doing and it's not allowed. I mean, you could be sued. So that section I think needs to be, and I was wondering why golf courses were taken out of the range grazing CR. Why'd you take that out of golf? Why'd you take that out?
Sorry.
It was conditional and it's just not, it's just being removed.
And just remind me where the golf courses are.
It's under, it's on the second page. On golf courses, right there.
So
Parks and open spaces. There
I
it is.
don't know why this is what was
Was already there.
given to me. I don't know where that came from.
That's the.
I felt like this is one area, trust me, I don't want more CUPs, but this is one area where in CR, well, RG, whatever we're calling it, Golf Course Country Club was a C and there's a line crossed through it. So, and then in RAR 20, it's just left blank.
Yep.
So this is one place where I actually put a C there. Yeah, because again, if we go to that definition and what it's supposed to be for, I don't think a golf course country club fits that description. Yes, okay, it maintains some open space, but golf courses take a lot of water and yeah, blah, blah, blah. So I just, not that anyway, I don't know why it's not there. Mary, I can't answer that question, but I certainly don't think it should be a P. So
No, I don't either, but it's allowed in the, it's conditional in residential.
yes,
So how are you?
We
defining
actually-
acreage for a golf
we-
course?
we as staff actually want to remove that C.
So where would you put a golf course in Moab, Utah? Nowhere. And you remove the C there and you remove the C in CR.
Well, she has.
So part of our thinking as staff is that we are in the desert. We do already have an existing golf course in our county. Should there be another golf course in our county? Don't know the answer to that question. We did put a P, I think we did, instead of a C, well, the C was scratched out. In RG proposed to be CR, we ended up putting a P there and having a C under RAR 20. But
For golf courses.
again, these are things I think that you all
I
should.
look at St. George, they're bigger than we are, and they have more golf courses than any other place in the state.
But these are things that you all should look at. And again, I encourage you, this is what we did. I mean, I encourage you to really take that table and dissect it. And as Mary did, are the numbers correctly that refer you to the use standards, and are there any use standards? But I think important to start with is, as you look at the definitions of those zones, it's really, think about that as you're looking at each of these columns and these categories. And given that description of the zone, what's appropriate and what's not. And so I think that's just important to pay attention to.
Noticing that there are public comments in the chat before we get to 6:30, should we
Yeah.
address that? Make sure that they're on
Yes,
the record.
we do have somebody who's ready to make a public comment. I don't know if we want to do that now or if we want to wait until the end of the CUP discussion.
Sorry, I thought they were
We-
commenting on the scene.
So they are actually.
They are?
I also see a range of crazy.
Well, we do have I think we can probably do this in the middle of this, look at these chats. After all, we have a time for people to make comments at 6 o'clock and we haven't done it. So yeah, why don't we read those? Not online though.
And so Obi, I would say, this is a workshop, so we don't actually have a 6 o'clock public comment
Okay.
time because this is a workshop. But I think, I haven't seen the comment, but I think someone who's watching on Zoom and would like to make a comment, we could certainly read what their comment is, but
Yeah.
it's up to you
That's
as
what
the
I-
chair.
Yes,
Yeah, but no, there won't be a public comment period.
okay.
I just want to make that
Got
clear.
it. That's good. Yeah, so why don't we read those?
Okay, so this is from Michael Scarda. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong. I would like to make a public comment against reducing range and grazing housing density. Michael Scarda is the owner of Namaste Rock. That was it. I believe this is in regard to the RAR 20.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that we didn't have a 6 o'clock public comment. That's
That's true.
Yeah.
been ingrained in me for so long.
Yeah, it's
For me
okay.
also.
No, it's okay. I'll just say to Michael, I'm a little confused by your question and I don't blame you and I don't blame me for being confused. In the existing range and grazing zone, because there is one, we're not proposing any changes to that zone right now.
Yes,
I
that was-
believe
yeah,
that's
that was
correct.
covered earlier in the meeting. that we-
Yeah, so I just want to clarify that for you, Michael, who is watching. There are no changes to that zone proposed at all. What is proposed is a new zone called range and resource. So it's a
Country
brand new zone proposed. And right now, the minimum lot size proposed for that is 20. So I just wanted to make it clear that there is no changes proposed to range and grazing right now.
I think his concern is that he's got grazing and he wonders if that would be one that would go up to 20.
Yes.
Since we don't know.
We have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So I think,
Were there any other?
I think for CUP, I think we just let y'all spend some time with that table. And what I would encourage you to do is, staff is always available. So if you, I encourage you to send an email to us, maybe direct them, send them just to me and I will disseminate as needed. But if you want to send us an email with your thoughts, if you want to come in and talk to us about, I don't really understand this, I'm confused, just please come in and talk to us. I encourage you to do that. And if you can't come in because you work, I totally get it. So send us an email or say, hey, can I talk at 6 o'clock tonight? You know, just whatever it is, just reach out to us and just send it to me and I'll figure out who's available or who has time and all those kinds of things. But you know, please reach out with more questions and more thoughts. It'll help us, it'll help you. And it'll help that meeting on the 9th hopefully go a little smoother.
Can we get an Excel version of this if it exists?
Yeah, it's been hard for me to like read it.
Amy, that would help me incredibly.
I wonder too, just in the formatting of the land use code, if, where there's a page break to format it with the
Oh, so
zone
it,
at the top, cause we've
Yeah,
got
no, it jumps in.
12 columns.
let me think about that and get back to you. I totally hear what you're saying. I don't know what format it was originally done in, not that we could,
Excel.
yeah, and not that we couldn't export it and, Yeah,
Actually was available on the website at one point, but you had to have a Google account, which I don't have, and so I
Okay.
couldn't get it. But so everybody could have unloaded it or downloaded it at one point if he had a Google account, which I think most people have. I don't. I refuse to get one, so it's good.
so I would, and so I would just, yeah. I would just caution you. My concern is if we have all these Excel spreadsheets floating around, that's just my concern. So if we email it to you, it's yours to use in the meeting, right? To keep track of things for your own brain. I don't want these getting out, there'll be too many versions everywhere, right? So, so please, if you want to use it for your own, brain and your own use, please, yes, we'll see how we can do that.
Maybe for me.
Is there a
it
way to
helped me.
convert it from?
Yeah,
Google
we'll
to
figure it
Excel?
out, but I'm just
No, I mean,
saying.
if I did it at home, could I convert it from Google to Excel, do you know?
You can
Well, at
down-
least
This is a
it's a
PDF.
PDF that we sent you right now,
Yeah.
so we'll figure that out. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
please use it for your own use.
We won't put it on Facebook.
Yeah.
I mean, you could, but.
Amy, for my own use, it's nice to be able to highlight a cell that I
Oh,
have a
yeah.
concern with and
Yeah.
then put a comment.
Absolutely.
It's a really great way to be organized for this
Yeah.
meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we can do that. So, all right.
Amy, I had one more question as concerns kind of the process, I guess. And that is, if we are going to have a hearing for what amounts to a zoning change, we're no longer required by law to notify every landowner. Is that correct?
I'll try to answer this correctly. And I do have a bunch of, I'm old school. I like to print paper when things get really complicated. So I do have a bunch of printed, state statutes about noticing in my folder here, and I can grab them if we need to. But, as we discussed this with the, legal counsel, it was settled on that the 10-day notice would be sufficient, at both the planning commission and the county commission. So, but what we have, what we're going to be doing is, noticing in a broader, more areas, well, that's the wrong thing, more ways of getting the notice out than usual. So right now, we notice on the state's website that we're required to, and we put it on our website. And then, so I'd like to post it in multiple places, post it at the library, post it at Moonflower, post it at, in a way that more people are actually going to see this. And there's some rules and regulations about that. There's, state statutes about it, about, are you posting it in the places where the most people are likely to see it? And so I think that we as staff are talking about where else could we just post it, that draws people's attention.
In the advertisement?
Yeah, we can certainly, put a public notice, in the papers, and that's the other thing we've talked about doing.
Times is a paper of record,
Yeah,
capital E, capital R, and I think you might actually have to notice the times when you use.
yeah.
You hit the op website, I think you also need to hit. the times.
So that's something
That's
that's something we're talking about as far as, we believe that the 10 days, we're good to go with the 10 days, but it's getting that out where the most people see it as possible. So that's something we as staff are talking about, how best to do that.
What about the,
Yeah.
what about the internet, social
Coffee
media?
shops.
So,
Or movies.
so we put it on our website, and a lot of people know to look for our website, but not a lot of people don't. So I know that we have a few social media accounts. I haven't learned, all about them yet, or what we normally do with them. I haven't had time to even think about those. So, but yes, that's certainly an idea. But again, we have to get this notice out by Friday. So I think we're gonna go with the resources available to us and how best can we do this. And we'll do the best we can, but, that's the way I'm gonna answer that right now.
Just as, I know you won't have the answer to this, but just as an estimate, how many actual individuals do you think we would have to notify if we were going to notify? Would it be every landowner?
So when you're doing, and again, I'm getting tired and I don't have the things in front of me, but so sometimes when you're doing a change to the land use code or you're doing a change to the zoning map, you try to notify those folks that are directly affected, right? So if we were to change the zoning on a property, here's the 100 properties that we're proposing to change your zone. Then yes, we would have to literally notify each property owner. But at this point, even though we're proposing a new zone, there's no map associated with it. So we don't know who to notify. So
What I was talking about at the beginning.
So-
It's a problem.
Exactly.
So, there's a lot of nuances involved in noticing and all those things, but, so we're gonna do the best we can for the planning commission and for the county commission as far as getting the word out. But the 10-day notice is what, our codes and things say.
I was going at it the opposite way that you did, Tony. As in, I mean.
When I have to public notice at work, I send 15,000-20,000 postcards out at a time. Got like 3 employees.
Just to do that.
That's, yeah.
Any other comments? So we're,
I guess I feel like we washed this, CUP thing. We've just, there was a record of me and Trish's comments on here. I feel like we've washed a lot of it through the machinery, but there's always more stuff to do. Like one of the things with like the heat and cool guys, we were bringing up the fact that, is it industrial or is it commercial? And I thought that was like just an interesting like kind of thing where it's like, we don't really have much light industrial, but that's a very needed thing. And it's like, are you making, like, what's the problem? Is it the noise? It's actually less dense of it, like retail space, something like that is less dense. I saw that as something that was like, oh, they felt they kind of exposed a weird loophole, or not loophole, but like a crack that they were falling into with stuff. And then I had got this thing and I kind of started with the definitions, and I felt like there was a lot of stuff to go over the definitions, but yeah, that was just my 2 cents on that. Felt like some of the definitions we had worked on, and I saw some old stuff.
Yeah, I know, Aaron, you brought that up. One of the other times we talked that, or we met about, it felt like the planning commission had provided some direction to staff, but it didn't seem to get reflected in what you saw next.
Yeah.
And so I want to be very cognizant of that, and I don't know what happened in the, I don't know how to track that necessarily. But yeah, I
Well,
want.
just seeing like, are we done? I'm like, oh man, I still have I actually focused on the definition
Okay.
rather than the CUPs.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you looked at the definitions. I mean, we can certainly delve into that for a minute if everybody wants to keep going. I just brought up 6:30 as a breaking point, but you all can decide how long you want to go. It's up to you as the commission. So if you want to, are there, hey, Aaron,
you could go.
Okay.
Do your bullet.
Okay, my bullet points was the active employment definition. I feel like we had talked about how that, like, we had things in there, like if your kids were in high school, or we had things where it was like, if you graduated from high school in the last 5 years, like you could qualify for active household or AE, what is it? The active employment thing that was taken. That's not in there. Right. So to me, that's like, okay, to qualify for an HDHO thing, you have to meet that AEH qualification. And there's a lot of like things that I feel like we're missing off of that we had come to agreement to, right? Like if you went to high school here, if you had kids in the high school or in school here, I mean, there was reasons why we had like included those. And then you had a thing on cluster developments, taking it out. I was just wondering, like why take those out? Cause I'm like, just seemed a funny thing, like maybe this is kind of like a floating legacy thing.
Aaron, I'm sorry. When you say cluster developments was taken out, do you mean the definition?
Yeah, you had a big line through it. On,
I'll look at that. I don't.
yeah, that's all right. I'm just trying to go through fast. Then you had a question on how many unrelated people and family, and I think we had a kind of debate about like, you know, we start getting in politics of like, you know, is it the Olive Garden family? You know, like, Tony, Tony said that. I was like, that's amazing. That's really
State code has a definition, and I think that's where that came from.
okay. Okay, because it's like, you know, how many unrelated people can live together, you know, like that's the thing. You had a question about modular homes, like you were like, well, aren't mobile homes not allowed in Grant County? And like the International Building Code would say you would have to have a foundation on there. So that was kind of, and then let's see. Okay. There was a thing on there on 9.6.15 where like we identified minor changes. And if you were doing minor changes on things, I just remember with the Lionsback development, you know, it was like, oh, we're just doing minor changes as opposed to major changes. And that was like a big legal hiccup for that. And I thought that was a good idea. And then, you know, the 3.3.2, I'll bang on this drum some more. ADU can only be made after the principal use. I have talked with many people that would love to build their own home. And if they could stack it where they could build the ADU first while they build their other house, that would be great for them. And then they would move out of the ADU into the bigger one. And I just don't understand why we like wouldn't let that stepping stone.
And Mikkel just chimed in and she's correct. They actually can do that. There's a few quantifiers to that, which is if you build the ADU first, then you want to build another home that would be that's become the primary dwelling.
Yeah.
You can do that. You have to, the first one you build has to meet the square footage requirements for the ADU. And then when you want to build the next house, there's a way to do that. It's possible now. So there's a way to do that now.
Struck out, like I was just responding to what was in there and I was like, oh, why is that?
I don't know what comment.
Oh, am I like, maybe I'm like on this wrong, like.
No, I think
There was like,
I don't know whose comments these are. So
I know they're not comments, they're like redlined items.
yeah, I think it was
So
previous staff's comments that probably you shouldn't, I don't know. I don't know whose comments these are.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay,
didn't know those were in.
I was commenting on some archaic comment.
Some of them are good.
Yeah, but keep going, Aaron. I'm just saying, I don't know whose comments. this are.
Oh,
Just-
yeah, I guess I can't even find it right now, but it's like, there's so many pages, but I had just written these notes. About, and again, the, owner occupation. The owner occupation mandate where having a duplex with an ADU has to be owner occupied, and then other restrictions or deed restrictions on ADUs. That's still in there.
If you could provide the state code for that, because it's changed, right? If the state code require that you don't even have to have an ADU into your property or something like that. There's a state code that changed, right?
Yeah, so sorry, Aaron, we were dealing with something on the YouTube for a minute. Can you ask your question again, Aaron? I apologize.
No, I just was saying, I feel like I'm like reading something different than I got sent.
So, but you had a question about ADUs. What was the other?
No, I just was saying,
It's about the owner occupied.
yeah, the owner occupied, on that, like, I just, again, think that I would wish we could have a discussion about whether or not we really have a consensus on moving that off or not.
And were you talking about specifically for the duplex scenario or what?
Any and all of them.
Again, will you tell me what you,
So like my thing is like, why have a deed restriction? Why make it so that you can, you have to be an owner occupier if you were to build one on some of these ADU things? Like they're,
Mary brought up something about state code changing.
No, didn't the state code make some changes to ADUs? It happened like 2 years ago. or something.
This was about the internal ADUs. Yeah, they
Yeah.
did.
the internal external.
as to your questions, Aaron, I can only speak to sort of general practice and things like that, not the history of it here, but
No, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, I saw those definitions as almost equally as important as this discussion we had about
Absolutely.
the transfer station, about other stuff. Those
yes.
definitions we're not getting to, and I feel like there was some in there that I thought were
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah,
and
so
worth looking at.
So Aaron, and again, the commission can decide if we want to stay and keep talking. Or that's one thing where I encourage you to email us your questions and those specific things, but I'm gonna let Obi decide how he wants it, but thank you for, and I agree with you that those definitions are extremely important and staff does too. And so I've been writing down all the things you've been saying to take a look at them, but I wasn't sure if people wanted to have a discussion on those or if you're just bringing those to our attention.
So it would seem to me that we maybe should have some discussion on a couple of those. I mean, the very first one, the actively employed household, we might want to make sure that we can all chime in on what that definition is. And I didn't get quick enough to the ADU thing. Wasn't that requirement if you had a duplex and an ADU, or I can't remember which one
You
it
need
was
to-
attached to?
Yes, with the duplex and ADUs,
Then
owner,
you had to have one
right.
owner occupied.
And then there's also a any ADU has to have a deed restriction.
That deed restriction is simply that you aren't gonna rent it, right? Or is it?
Yeah,
Overnight rental.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I meant, yeah. So that you, yeah,
Yeah. So on the active employment household, you know, we have, so I thought this one was important, the active employment household. You either have to have like full-time, 30 hours or more, an owner of a representative business, and then it was like, if you had some kind of online work, it was like 75%. And then if you were retired, like a Moab retiree, you were under there. We had talked about, like, let's say my aging parents wanted to move to Moab. I'm a resident. Like, can they be, like, they're retired? I mean, like, for me to be around them and stuff, it would be like, I mean, that was a discussion we had. It would be like, could they be covered under that? And then, like, I remember that was something we debated. And I don't remember the outcome of that. I feel like,
So what I remember, because we were workshopping that
yeah,
with the
Okay.
county commission.
yeah,
And I mean, just, I don't know the number offhand. There were probably 20-ish suggestions, and the county commission voted, and they did amend the definition of AEH, and they essentially, there's just two more inclusions, one of which being anyone in 84532
right.
to include northern San Juan County, because previously it was just
Right.
Grand County. There was one other thing, and
So are we cool with the AEH definitions? Cause I'm not, but that's fine.
Aaron, we're pulling up the code right now because
Well, it's
we want to just see what it says right now. We're a little.
it's in the PDF that you sent. Okay, yeah, but yeah, okay.
Starts on page 7 of 76.
Yep, 7 of 76, yeah.
Yeah.
I downloaded,
Alphabetical order.
Yeah. so
So, Mikkel asked a good question earlier, and I'll just throw this out there. So those four that we initially discussed are the ones that the county commission felt really needed
Yeah.
to move forward, okay? And then, but we were told to continue moving
Oh,
all of
okay.
this forward,
Sure.
right?
sure,
So it's certainly something that, again, the planning commission could think about
Right.
on the 9th.
I can
You-
help you out. We're not actually gonna have a motion on definitions on the 9th, are we?
okay,
Well, that's up to you, is what I'm getting at.
We understand that it's up to us, but we're.
yeah,
Yeah, and so.
Okay, let's carry it on. Sorry, I just thought everything that was given to us was like on
Well,
that.
well, it
deadline.
is, it's all going to be published in the agenda. It's all on the table at this point. So, but that doesn't mean you could move some sections forward and you could not move other sections forward.
You're
So,
very gracious in explaining to us our authority. Hope that you can lead us within our capacity.
I will try.
But I may be careful here. Are the definitions something they thought were prioritized?
We were not told that, but it's certainly, the definition section is a concern and a priority for staff. There's a lot of things in there. I agree with you, Aaron, that staff would like to clarify, change, add. Again, in the time frame that we're working with, I don't know how far we'll get with that or what that will lead to.
Okay.
But I agree, I really appreciate you, and I agree that it's an extremely important section of the code.
Yes.
And if you have a strong definition section, it makes everyone's lives much better. And so I don't feel that our definition section is strong right now. And so it'd be great if it could move forward, but there's a lot of things going on at the same time. And so again, that's up to the planning commission. I think that if you want to tackle that, and please do, and staff again will try to amend that as best we can as we have time to present you with as best we can. So I don't know how else to
I got
answer
a-
that right now, but
Yeah,
but all the things that you have are on the table to move forward. It's but those four in particular, they felt was crucial to move forward. So
I had
the
a-
definition section was not one of those mentioned.
I had a thought about that, Aaron, and that is, we've already had some good conversation about definitions, and we've actually moved the ball a few times.
Yeah.
That's it, and I think to your point, Amy, it may be beneficial if we had a workshop specifically on definitions at some point in the next month or two, so that we can address your concerns and our concerns and get everybody on the same page. But I think this next meeting on the 9th, if we get through all four of those, we're gonna
Yeah.
probably be doing pretty good. Because
And I'll reiterate my thesis that we shouldn't be being forced to move forward on any of these four inclusive. I think it's wrong.
right.
And
So work hard and
including
bring them.
especially with the definitions, how important they are, we should not rush that. So I'm grateful that in their wisdom, the council didn't require us to force
Well-
these definitions through in 10 days' time.
Tony, you kind of led into my last question of the night, which is, what is the expected output of that meeting on the 9th?
A motion to recommend those four things de minimis or not recommend.
So and could that motion include changes to those?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, motion as amended, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So then our mission for the 9th is to come to some consensus as a planning commission on those four items.
Well, I think the consensus will come on the 9th when you actually have to make a motion. But yeah, this was a workshop to kind of help everybody work through those a little bit. And Aaron, I asked Mikkel to look at Bryce to look at the actual active employment household section of the code. And there is a definition in there. Bryce, go ahead.
So I think a lot of these definition edits that we're seeing in that Article 10 are literally just moving definitions from the code in their sort of messy fashion. We have to search into the actual definition section. So it might take a little bit more work to try to figure out if definitions are being edited or just sorted into a better location.
Oh,
Because it seems to be a combination of the two.
Yeah.
Would you read the one that's in there?
Sure. So, bullet point 1 on that is a full-time aggregate of 30 hours employment per week employee of an entity or entities located within our zip code. Or 2, an owner or owner's representative of a business entity with a primary place of business within Grand County. Or 3, full-time aggregate 30 hours of employment per week for 9 months out of the year. Worker who is self-employed, works out of their home, and must provide their entire list of clients' workload so it can be verified that a minimum 75% of their work or clients are based within Grand County or provide proof of at least 5 years of residency within our zip code.
Not given that sections.
Yeah, so there's 2 more bullet points there, but if you're interested in looking at that, that's 4.7.3, and you can compare that to what's proposed in Article 10.
okay.
So, Obi, before we break, and I'm kind of sensing it's about time for that. I think it would be good if we had just a short discussion along the points of what I did, what I said, and what Tony said. The output in the next meeting is going to be a motion. Or I guess the other question is, it might be more efficient to move it through as, for example, 4 motions, one on each of those topics. Would that be an acceptable approach? It's going to be hard to drive consensus and build a 10-page motion on all 4 of these things.
That fits our rule. I would support that. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, it's not, it might make some sense.
Yeah, I do. We'll check with legal, but I don't think there's really an issue with that because they're 4 very different things and 4 very, and your recommendation might be different for each one.
Probably
So,
won't be good.
We'll double check, but it's a good question. We'll find out. I don't think it'll be a problem, but we'll make sure.
And then you would build the agenda to follow that kind of a format.
Set them as 4 different items, I believe.
We
that
could.
have their own individual motions.
Even if we don't do that, I don't think there's anything that precludes you from separating them into different motions. So anyway, we'll just double check.
I especially like that idea because when in recitations of the motion, having to recite amended motions over 4 bullets is gonna be psychotic. We've had to do it a couple of times and thankfully Mikeism works that way, but I'd like to not have to do that if I can avoid it.
I think if, I'm just picturing that there's gonna be more than one person sitting in those seats too, and just for them to keep things straight, they might have
Yeah.
concerns with one and not another. So,
So I guess one good question then, for the planning commission. Would, for the 9th, for September 9th. Do you feel that perhaps we just address the 4 that we were told to address?
I strongly, I think that is the bare minimum we should consider.
I think at a maximum.
Yes.
In maximum, yeah. Bare maximum, yeah, maximum. Maximum, thank you.
let me-
It's getting late, but as simply as a matter of austerity.
Wrong in thinking that after the next 180 days give us then that ability to be worked on all.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
So I don't think there's any reason to sit here and shove budget stuff.
I just think it's just fanning the flames.
No, I-
It's just.
And so, yeah, to Tricia's point,
I'm sorry.
the commission is going to have a meeting on September 3rd, the county commission, and they're going to propose another 180-day resolution. So you'll know by your meeting on the 9th if in fact passed. And so, yeah, that, I think that can, maybe help you rest a little easy that we have that additional time to work on everything else.
Let me quickly ask the format of this workshop, because we do have workshops at times where there's a table. And people talk about, well, so what would you like to do? Here's kind of the plan and here's a map and where do you think density should be? That's not what this workshop that we're having. This is gonna be a public hearing
So
this next week.
So this is the workshop right now.
This is the workshop.
Yeah,
And
we're,
that's the public hearing.
no, so
To next week, the night,
No,
No.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
yeah, so this workshop was just for the planning commission
Got
to
it.
talk with staff about
Yep.
what we were directed to do and what would the
Good.
planning commission like to do, okay? The September 9th meeting is a public hearing with public comment, the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
So, on whatever we decide to move forward. So I'm hearing some consensus that, perhaps the only things we move forward right now are those 4 items. And, so
Yes.
I think we will just touch base with a few folks and make sure, that's good, but I don't see why it's not. So, and I know, I'm looking at Aaron's face, but,
Oh, sorry.
it's okay, Aaron.
It's away from my
And
eyes.
so I make that same face all the time. And so, and I do think that staff, you know, we certainly want to keep moving forward on improving things in this land use code, especially the definition section, the CUP use table, which is one of the 4 things, things like that. So I think that, the planning commission could then, if we move those 4 things forward, we'll see what the county commission does, but you're providing a recommendation on those 4 things. And you're probably still proposing to table the other things. And so I think it would be helpful, if that's the direction we go, to say, you know, we'd like some more time with these other sections. And, or we'd like to wait for the future land use map to happen for these other sections, or, so I think it's good to just provide an explanation for the other ones, as best we can.
I would say.
Would we then maybe need 5 items, the 4 in question, and then the 5th being to
Yeah,
to explicitly table
Sure.
all other items in the land use
Okay.
code,
Not-
so it's not complied.
And not just the future land use map, I think we should postpone all of, like we talked about the last 2 weeks ago, all of those land use code changes until the completion of the land use plan.
right,
Not the map, the full
Right.
plan. Like it's really like, I think it's extremely sketchy and I disagree with the opinion that we can move forward in good faith with code changes without current planning during the. Just gonna continue to reiterate that this is irregular.
sure, okay. Yeah, I think we can make it 5, Steve. I think that'd be fine.
So then, yeah, to that point, Tony, then one of the outputs on September 9th could be a motion. We could do 4 motions, and it could be tabling each and every one of those until the future land use plan.
I don't want to fly in the face of the direction from the commission, but I think Steve nailed it. 4 motions for the 4 things that we were told we have to consider, and then a motion to, I would say,
For the
if
rest.
I were in charge of building the agenda, I would say, motion to table everything else until the end of it.
Maybe the only exception might be the definitions. I can't remember all the definitions because some of them might have something to do with the land use map sort of thing. But if the definitions are crucial to get to, we may, that, I'm not talking about getting to next meeting, but they may be something we could do before.
But we can, tabling something doesn't have. to-
You're exactly right. Exactly right.
We can
Yes,
Pick anything up.
yes.
We can,
We can table them indefinitely.
we can consider staff recommendations at any meeting.
Okay.
Well, thank you for working through a lot tonight. I know it's, complicated and full of lots of questions. So I appreciate you guys working through that, and we'll do the best we can to line all that out in the staff report and hopefully make things as clear as we can.
We remember that we expect perfection.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Only two things, and any future considerations that anybody dares bring up?
I might be stuck in Uinta County, so I'm really sorry, guys.
Okay.
Will be that the main reason I wanted to bring that four motions thing up is because I think it's really important for everybody on this commission to go through these in detail and bring notes and understand what you want that motion to be. Right, that's our mission in 2 weeks. Anyway, I'll be quiet.
Well, then I'll seek a motion to adjourn,
How about we adjourn?
and seconded by Steve. All in favor? It's unanimous. With an abstention.
That one wasn't so bad.
I do.
Take a seat.
Yeah,
You need to do your own work before the next.
I know, definitely.
That's-